Record. All right, my friends. So I'd love to welcome you all to this evening. Tonight's discussion is about uniting the world. And really honored to welcome Dr. Stephen Phelps. And a little bio. Stephen received his dual bachelor's degrees in physics and philosophy from Stanford and a Ph.D. in physics from Princeton University, and he specialized in cosmology. He worked for 13 years at the Bahá'í World Center in Haifa in Israel and in its research department, where he coordinated the indexing and collation of the Bahá'í Sacred Writings and their translation from Persian and Arabic into English. The theme tonight is the following: in a world whose social fabric seems to be coming apart at the seams, how can we build new bridges of community and weave new bonds of fellowship? So friends, thank you very much for joining. And Stephen, thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. And I will turn it over to you. And if I can just ask everyone to kindly go on mute and stay on mute throughout. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brett, for the beautiful music and for the introduction.
You're welcome.
Is everyone seeing my slides here?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what you expected coming into this. I hope I will deliver something unexpected. Although this, in a way, is an introduction to the Baha'i faith, you will not find names, dates, or quotations in it. I'm going to attempt to approach the subject from a different direction. Let's say from the bottom up rather than the top down, and we'll see how successful it is. I hope to leave plenty of time at the end for conversation, both about the path that I've chosen and about the content. There will be 13 slides, and let's start with a point on which I think we can all agree to some extent, that our planet is in a state of crisis. We are disunited as a planet on multiple levels. Individuals are estranged, apathetic at best. Between nations, there are wars, both hot and cold. Within nations, there is social polarization along political lines, racial lines, other lines. All of this seems to be getting worse rather than better. One can immediately stop and ask, well, is this a feature or a bug of the world or of humanity? One can say, well, it's always been thus. There's always been conflict. This is just the way the world is. One could even cite a very beautiful passage of scripture in support of this contention. For everything, there's a season. Time for war and a time for peace. Maybe this is the time for war. Maybe this is one of those times in which it's a time to refrain from embracing. One can call to one's support ideas from Charles Darwin, the idea that we are here because of billions of years of intense and pitiless competition. And so in a way, conflict is going to be baked into our DNA, and it's going to be baked into our social dealings with others. But what I want to argue is that whether we want to assert that conflict is a feature or a bug in relation to the past and in relation to the present, I want to set that question aside and simply assert that the imperative of the immediate present and of the future is to find a higher state of organization for the planet, to find a higher state of unity for the planet. Because there are existential threats that otherwise will do us in as a species and potentially do in all life on this planet. Existential threats owing to our ability to destroy ourselves actively, and to let ourselves be destroyed more passively by simply not taking care of the environment that we are collectively degrading through our actions that are not sufficiently coordinated. One way to look at the ethical failures of the present is in terms of three principal axes, the axes of culture, of time, of space. In a way, we are failing ourselves and failing the planet when we consider it okay to discriminate between people based on where they're born or what they look like. In addition to that, though, we also fail ourselves and the planet when we put zero value on future generations in our present ethical calculus. Too many of the decisions we make today do not sufficiently take into consideration our children and grandchildren and future generations beyond. And finally, we fail ourselves and our planet when we don't take into account not just other human beings on the planet, but other life on this planet. If we don't attribute value to other species in our present ethical calculus, we end up going down the path to self-destruction. At the root of all of these ethical failures, we can identify as a kind of a self-centeredness, an inability to see the organic connectedness between things in its various dimensions, and to allow that sense of organic connectedness to deeply inform our actions. We human beings over many millennia, uncounted millennia, have evolved various narrative frameworks to understand our place in the world, to help answer questions of where we came from, where we're going, to help guide questions of what we ought to be doing in the presence on the basis of these visions of who we are and what we are. I think all of these narratives that we currently have access to are failing us in one way or another in relationship to this great global existential challenge that we face. We are seeing the failure of religious narratives, whether these are the historical narratives of the world's faith traditions, whether of the East or of the West, for the reason that for all of their ethically universal teachings, which are found in all of the scriptures of world religions, it tends to be that one's sense of identity ends at the boundaries of membership in that religion. They have not, any one of them, been able to transcend that boundedness, that sense of identity, which does not sufficiently extend beyond the boundaries of membership. They're also weighed down by the baggage of dogma that has become fixed and crystallized over time, which is incompatible with what we now know about the universe and how the universe works over several centuries of the application of the scientific method. Our religious narratives are also failing us in a more personal dimension. There is a great movement, particularly in this last century, a great movement towards personal spirituality, meditation practices, yoga, New Age, and so forth, all of which may satisfy a few and may quench that thirst for identity and thirst for a sense of connectedness, but have not shown themselves able to inspire or guide collective action on a larger scale. We also are looking at a failure of the various secular narratives that are available to us, narratives of identity. These can be narratives of national identity, of racial identity, of other sorts of ways of identifying ourselves, which are essentially tribal or local and not universal. At their best, narratives of identity, particularly narratives of race, can address past and present injustices, and in that sense, they can be seen as historically necessary, but they don't point a way forward to the embrace of larger identity, which is, I will submit, necessary for the present global situation. We do have a grand narrative that is kind of unspoken, well, spoken of a lot, but not, maybe we don't see it as a grand narrative. This is the grand narrative of materialism, of the consumer society, the narrative that the way to happiness is more stuff. I don't think I need to comment anymore on that as a potential grand narrative going forward. And finally, we have this grand narrative of secular humanism which fully embraces what we've come to understand through our scientific investigation, and which discounts or sidelines the collective spiritual inheritance of the human race. The secular humanist narrative can be a beautiful and awe-inspiring narrative. It can try to point us in the direction of greater respect for the other, but I submit that it doesn't sufficiently motivate that other-centeredness which is necessary in the world today. A great example of what I would think of as like a peak secular humanist narrative is Carl Sagan's beautiful ode to the pale blue dot, when after decades of floating in outer space, traveling towards past the solar system, one of our space probes turned around and took one last picture of Earth, which is this mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. And one can look at that, which is really a scientific narrative of the awareness of just how small we are in this vast world, which can give us a sense of how precious life is and how silly it may be to be fighting over this patch of dust. But that narrative somehow is not enough. It requires what we require is something more than the facts of the matter. What we require is a new kind of grand narrative. I'll say parenthetically, especially for those who have studied these in university, haven't we decided that grand narratives are bad? Anyone who's encountered postmodernism, the ideas very much in fashion in the late 20th century on university campuses, a rejection and suspicion of any kind of grand narrative as something which history has shown us is almost inevitably an oppressive kind of narrative, something that ends up excluding some people, including other people. I will, and the central argument that I'm making is that we do in fact need a grand narrative, but a grand narrative that is that has the cohesive benefits of grand narratives that can bring us together into a sense of common identity without being an oppressive narrative. How can we do that is the question, and the next few slides will be discussing what some elements of that kind of new grand narrative must be. I'll say first of all, and second of all, that it has to be a scientific narrative, and at the same time, it has to be a sacred narrative. It has to satisfy both of these conditions. It has to be a scientific narrative in the sense that obviously it has to be consistent with the massive accumulation of knowledge that's taken place over the past few centuries about what those fixed patterns are that within which life and consciousness emerge, those laws of nature expressed in a few beautiful, or at least semi-beautiful mathematical equations that can be written down on a few postcards. This is a baseline understanding of the universe that the grand narrative of the future has to be consistent with. That narrative tells the story of evolution, of cosmic evolution, of biological evolution, cultural and social evolution, starting from something very simple and evolving into something complex over many eons. Possibly, although improbably, on our planet alone, I think with greater probability, something which has emerged throughout the universe on other planets in accordance with laws which may as yet be undiscovered by us. Laws which bring into being life and consciousness as kind of islands of order in the face of what otherwise is encroaching chaos and entropy. And within that scientific narrative, we recognize life and consciousness as being quite rare and precious. This is the pale blue dot narrative. But the grand narrative of today also has to be a sacred narrative. It has to recognize that while we are material beings, we are first and foremost conscious beings, beings possessed of what we call a soul, what we call spiritual beings. That all beings, however, have consciousness or spirit in various degrees. Even the plants and animals have spirit in their own degrees and consciousness in their own degrees. The highest degree of consciousness attained on this planet is that of human consciousness, which whose peak and summit is reached by the full consciousness of self, which religious scriptures of various faith traditions identify that full awareness of self with the awareness and knowledge of God. This sacred narrative has to recognize that we are all intimately, organically, and spiritually connected, and that connectedness enables and elevates and catalyzes and transforms our consciousness in ever-expanding circles, individually and collectively, in circles that ultimately end, at least in the present epoch of time, at the boundary of our planet. And as a result of that sacred narrative of interconnectedness, we recognize also that the highest human virtues are those of love and unity, not by some arbitrary diktat of a higher power, but by the simple outworkings of the nature of things, that consciousness evolves through physical systems which are organized at higher and higher levels. And that organization is enabled and possible only when there is a sense of the value of the other, which allows beings like us to come together into larger and larger social configurations that unlock deeper and deeper perspectives and dimensions of consciousness. I'll also argue that elements of this new grand narrative, which is a liberating narrative, not an oppressive narrative, and a universal narrative, not a local narrative, that it will have a certain ethic, a certain metaphysics, a certain epistemology, to use the terms from philosophy. And this ethic is going to be one overarching ethic of universality. It will be a metaphysics of process or progress, and it will be an epistemology not of the absolute, but an epistemology of the relative. So I'll say a few more words on each, and then we can open it to questions. And we have a new participant in the back, just freshly home from the school bus. So with regard to the ethic of that grand narrative, a universal ethic is one in which the local narrative of love for one's nature becomes sublimated to become a love for all humanity. It recognizes that love is the changeless heart of all religions, expressed according to the exigencies of the day. It recognizes at the center of this ethic the principle of the unity of the human race, both as a truth to be acknowledged and as a goal to be striven for. It's an ethic that is characterized as religions in the past. This is what I'm listing here are principles that are not new, but an ethic of care for the poor and of justice for the oppressed. It also has a metaphysics, and this is where perhaps the metaphysics is somewhat new and different compared to the grand narratives of the past, at least the sacred or religious grand narratives of the past. And that is that it embodies a metaphysics of progress or process. It recognizes the evolution over time of religions and religious systems that are not frozen at a certain moment in time, but that are able to evolve according to the needs and exigencies of the hour. They affirm at the same time certain unchanging things that are essential and common to the past, such as the idea of the golden rule. But in holding to this metaphysics of progress, it lets go of the dogmatisms of the past, respecting and validating what went before, but noting the essential value and necessity of change, of evolution, particularly in the social sphere, but also recognizing that evolution and progress are also elements of what we think of not so much as the social sphere, but as the core theological sphere of different religions. When we look at the theologies of different religions at different periods in time, they don't all say the same thing. Some of them were polytheistic or monotheistic or non-theistic, and we can see these all as different angles onto an ultimate reality which transcends all of these. Different angles that are ultimately functions of space and time and exigencies of the day. This metaphysics of progress, of what Baha'is call progressive revelation, also points the way towards the future. It is socially progressive in that it ultimately sees the society and the outworkings of the laws and principles of society through time as becoming more and more liberalizing, as more embracing more and more people, and in all the diversity of people. And it also recognizes that the universe is in a state of perpetual evolution, and this can get to the end point, the end point, if you will, although it's not an end point in time, of this metaphysics of progress, which is that the universe is constantly evolving towards the knowledge of its own self. We can put this in theological terms as God loved creation and brought it into being so that creation might love him. We want to use the sort of traditional theological formulation. But this can also be seen in non-theological, and I would argue equivalent terms, in statements such as those of Carl Sagan, that we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. This is ultimately a dynamic and progressive process of self-actualization. And finally, the grand narrative of the future has a certain epistemology, which is, that is a theory of knowledge. How do we come to know things? Which is grounded in the admission that we have no access to ultimate reality. That this essential subjectivity of the human observer in the world is a state which cannot be overcome. And as a result of that subjectivity, we have irreducible individual and collective perspectives that are a feature and not a bug. Baha'is like to call this unity and diversity, that there is a broader unity that we're headed towards, but within that unity, it embraces a diversity of perspective, which is a result of the fact that religious truth is not a single, unchangeable absolute that comes into being at a certain point in time, but that it is a dynamic and evolutionary reality which is relative to time and place. And because of this conception of religion, which is more dynamic and more relative, we also think of religion not so much as unchanging dogma, but as a remedy for a particular illness of a particular age. And as the illnesses from age to age may be different, so also the remedy must be different. And this enables us to embrace diversity of culture and spiritual viewpoint at a deeper level than we previously could. It allows us to validate those expressions of spirituality that came before, which otherwise we might look at and say, well, on the surface or even below the surface, these look like incompatible frameworks for understanding reality. But if we see them as all as remedies for particular issues and troubles of the age, that we can recognize something more unchanging and eternal that lies behind them. And so another, I think, consequence of this principle of relativity of perspective or relativity of religious truth is that the new grand unifying narrative or framework for the future has to be able to be described coherently, whether we're looking from the outside in or from the inside out. That is, if we want to look at it from the outside in, to the extent that we can as human beings, then we can look at history as the record of humans striving to understand the world and to better their own circumstances. But from the inside looking out, from the perspective of human subjectivity, it looks as though history has a particular direction that's guided by forces outside of our ken. From the inside out perspective, we can describe that same explanatory framework as God has a plan for us. There is a message for today, a new message for today, a new prophet, a new book. I'm claiming, and this is perhaps a controversial claim, and I would like for there to be plenty of time and space in conversation that follows to talk about this. But I will claim that you can think about or talk about religion both from this bottom-up point of view, which this whole talk has really been one example of, or from a top-down point of view, and that both meet in the middle somewhere, that they both meet in a certain view of where we are now, what the need of the age is, and where we need to go, and a solution that looks very similar. What does that solution look like? Well, how does social change come about? How do you advance a new narrative of interconnectedness that is going to deeply inform individual consciousness and perspective, and then work its way in these ever-expanding circles to humanity as a whole? What does a project in this kind of a space look like? And that's where I would offer the worldwide experience of the Baha'i community as an example of working out this new narrative in the world. We have, first of all, as we were mentioning at the beginning, this amazing and moving example of sacrifice, of individuals, of those women in Iran, both at different time points, particularly during the time of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, 1980, 81, but also in the founding years of the Baha'i faith, and more recently as well. We have an amazing example of personal sacrifice, which I think is evidence we can take as evidence for the transformative power of these ideas. People who have no reason not to simply say, I don't believe, and walk away, are allowing themselves to be killed for these ideas. That says something, I think, incredibly powerful about the transformative nature of this faith. We also see, in more objective terms, the Baha'i community as a grand experiment in diversity. Baha'is are found on every continent, in every country, in every tribe. Baha'i scriptures have been translated into hundreds of languages. There is a global network of people at the grassroots level trying, through trial and error, through consultation and action and reflection, to build up new models of community that are transformative. And it is, I think, uniquely distinguished by the coherence of this effort, which is happening at the local level, but which is guided by this model of universality, and which is also guided at the global level in a way that enables this great experiment in social transformation to have coherence. And so these are the some of the elements in which one can look at how this new grand narrative, and of course, when I say grand narrative now, I'm talking about the Baha'i faith and its project in the world. And I've only given a couple of brief examples of how we can look at what Baha'is are doing in the world to make this and to realize this new grand narrative of interconnectedness. That's all the comments I had, and I welcome your reactions and thoughts. Thanks so much for taking time for this.
Stephen, thank you so much. That was, oh, I needed that. I very much love the methodical approach and how you just sort of evolve that very, what could be quite an abstruse topic to something that is actually easier to grasp. And I appreciate that. I love that topic. I think it's so timely. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And yes, so love to open it up. And I see Giddy's hands raised, which is great. So please, if you have a question, just raise your hands, and that's by like doing it on the Zoom. Raise your Zoom hand. If you want to write your question in the chat, I'm happy to read it as well. And then we'll take it from there. So Gitti Etamad, welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you. I want to tell Steve, as usual, an extraordinary and unique talk. Thank you so much. My question has two parts. One is philosophical and one is practical. The philosophical one may look simple, but I wonder why God needs our love.
That's easy. What's next? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, easy question. Should I wait for part two, or should I just polish that one off first and then wait for part two?
You're starting with the hard ones. Eh?
And then I tell you the practical one later.
Okay. Well, all right. I'll bite. Obviously, what do I know about what God needs? I would offer the following thought, that while it says in the Bible that God created us in his image, I think the converse is also true, that our conception of God is in a way in our image. That is, we anthropomorphize the divine. We give and assign to God human attributes, human desires, love, wrathfulness, forgiveness, and so forth. And I would submit that these are human attributes in the end, and not attributes of that which we take to be the highest reality of the universe. We have a noun for it, or a proper noun for it in English, which is God. But the Baha'i writings tell us that invisible essence, which often also is referred to as in Persian, especially as al-haq, or the true one, or the truth, that this ultimate reality is beyond all names and attributes. And as it is beyond names and attributes, it's also really beyond loving, desiring, not desiring, and so forth. These are all metaphorical ways to allow us to grasp something which is otherwise entirely beyond our ability to grasp. So we say, for example, God needs our love, but that's just a metaphorical way of saying that there is a reciprocal relationship between the observer and the observed. That the universe is simultaneously observing and being observed, is being acknowledged or known, and is knowing. There's a metaphor that Abdu'l-Baha is particularly fond of, which he describes in which he describes creation as a kind of a circle that's comprised of arcs of ascent and descent. And that descending arc is an arc of emanation, like the sun shining its rays, and that's kind of like God loving. But that's only half of the cosmological story. The other half of the cosmological story is, and this is where the metaphor of the sun and the rays breaks down, because rays of the sun don't bend around and turn and return to the sun. maybe magnetic field lines is a slightly better metaphor, but it doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. But there's a second ascending arc or returning arc in which the universe, having been generated through this process of what some have called emanation, returns. And that returning arc is the arc of progress, of evolution, of knowledge, of consciousness, of love, everything that we associate with spirit and spiritual powers and capacities. And somehow and if we center in on this verb needs, we can say something like the universe wouldn't exist if there weren't this reciprocal relationship between the observer and the observed. And strangely enough, and one could go on and on and on about this, but strangely enough, there's something suggesting that in the actual, let's say, equations of the laws of the universe itself, and it has something to do with what has been called the quantum measurement problem. And immediately, I want to sort of warn against a too liberal use of quantum mechanics to fill in all sorts of black boxes, and the use and abuse of quantum mechanics in the spiritual domain has a long history. But with that caveat, I will suggest that there is something going on that we really don't fully understand that connects the act of observation with the reality of things. Somehow the universe is not fully realized until it's observed. Now, what we mean by fully realized and what we mean by observed is a matter for deep conversation. But there's something about that in the fundamental structure of reality. And I think one translation of that into theological language would be something like, God needs our love.
Thank you so much.
Now for part two.
Yeah, actually, part two, we have this amazing, unique, wonderful, practical, global Baha'i community. What are we doing wrong that it's not expanding?
That's a great question. Well, why was it expanding when it was expanding? I could sort of alter the question and say, in those times and periods where the faith really made leaps forward, can we correlate that with something we were doing on the inside or something that was happening on the outside? And it seems to me, at least, that the sort of moment, well, one of the moments of the most exciting expansion and forward leap of the faith in the world, at least in the West, I'll have to say in the West, was really during the time in the 60s, when there was a correlating process going on that we all know of in the social sphere of this awakening consciousness that was centered in youth, that were experimenting in ways they'd never experimented before with all sorts of things, and that were becoming socially conscious because of things like the Vietnam War and other things that in ways they weren't socially conscious before. And I think that had something to do with a leap forward in the numbers of people who are willing to take that leap and investigate something which is strange and foreign sounding. And that's something the Baha'i faith has going against it in the West, is it's strange and foreign sounding. And you dip, your toes in the water, and suddenly there's all these Islamic sounding names and concepts and terms and so forth. And particularly in the West, anything Islamic sounding with these Persian names is going to give us a kind of maybe raise red flags for people who otherwise haven't gone any farther in. They'll say, "Oh, this is some sort of Islamic thing." Mm-hmm. I think that's like a social trend, or something going on the outside that we don't have active control over. But I think that's one factor, is that we're particularly in the West is that there is this civilizational forces and movements that are acting as headwinds.
Question.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I have Quanta Dom Light, and then I have
Thank
some
you.
questions in the chat.
Question. I don't know how to
And
raise
then
my
I'll have
hand.
Parvane after,
Yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Yes, Parvane, I raised my hand. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question regarding the community development that might include those that are rationalists, those that are literalists, those that are mysticists, because in all religions in the past, those three elements somehow became groups where they felt disconnected from one another, because some people were rationalists, some people were more of a literalist and everything by the book. And then there were mysticists, like in Islam. I come from Islamic background, that they have the Sharias, and then they have Rumi, Mevlana, who is a mysticist. So how those elements, which is naturally included in all religions, how do they come together in the Baha'i faith and in a unified way? And are they practicing this in a way that is both individually and group-wise expressing their freedom and their interest, or is it more of a unified and kind of singular activity that exists in the Baha'i community? I don't know if I made a sense. It's just,
Yeah.
I try my best. Thank you.
It's a wonderful question and very, very difficult to answer, but it gets to the whole part of the existence of diversity in the human race and within the Baha'i community, which is a necessary and good thing. It has to be seen in a positive light as something which ultimately gives a community, makes a community more robust to the challenges which face it, and which enables that community to speak more authentically to the wider world. I think at the heart of what I understand when I read Baha'u'llah's message is a true and radical embrace of this diversity of human perspective, which can lead to some being more hard-headed rationalists, others being more literal followers of a particular religious tradition, and others being more non-boundaried mystical thinkers. And I think the sort of epicenter of where you can find this in Baha'u'llah's writings are in his own mystical writings, actually, in the Seven Valleys, in Gems of Divine Mysteries, and in several other tablets that were written in the first few years of Baha'u'llah's ministry in the 1850s and early 1860s. And in those tablets, he discusses the spiritual path in ways that on the outside sounds like he's just talking in conventional terms about the spiritual path being a progress through stages or valleys. You start in the valley of search and you end in the valley of nothingness. But at various places, Baha'u'llah drops hints that really what he's doing is not so much describing, here's what happens to an individual seeker when they're seeking ultimate reality, but rather, here are different stages or paths or valleys that different people are on at different times. And these are all true and correct within their own perspective. And so, and Baha'u'llah even recognizes that this is a challenge. And in a more recently translated mystical tablet, he says that, that this is always going to be the case, and that it leads to conflict and tension, because some people who come at reality from a particular lens will be triggered by people who come at reality from this other lens. And their immediate thought will be, oh, those people are not serious, or they're fanatical, or they're name your term that enables you to other that group. While at the same time, that group is doing the same thing to you. And this is all happening within the ambit of those who consider themselves to be followers or adherents of the religion of God for this day. And Baha'u'llah says, what's the solution then? He never proposes that there is a reduction of viewpoints to one single viewpoint. He proposes instead the solution, which is forbearance, humility, forgiveness, loving kindness, open-mindedness, all of these great spiritual attributes which enable one to fully validate the other, to fully see the divine in the other, even when that other is thinking about God and thinking about spirit and thinking about what it means to be a member of this faith in ways that are different from someone else. And I mean, I'll be the first to admit that Baha'is are not doing this perfectly, and that's only to be expected because we're all coming in from these different traditions where it is assumed and where it is part of the unspoken worldview that there's an us and them mentality when it comes to matters of religious truth. And so I personally think of this as a journey that the Baha'i faith will continue on in the generations to come of becoming more and more detached from those limiting conceptual frameworks of those faith traditions that we came from, and more deepened and immersed in these truly radical and embracing and unity preserving and diversity preserving perspectives that are found in Baha'u'llah's writings.
Stephen, thank you. I have a number of questions. So just for those who are waiting, I'm gonna, Parvane is gonna go, and then Shala, and then I have 3 or 4 questions in the chat. So just know if you raise your hand now, it might be 6 questions from now. Go ahead.
Quick. Thank you very much. That was excellent, extraordinary, very intelligent, above average, because I consider myself below average, so it was huge. I tried to make notes and I couldn't keep up. Number one, can we have the slide? Because it's not a matter of just listening one time and we claim that we understand everything. Yeah,
of course, yes.
Yeah, if I want to come up with questions, there's lots of questions. But I'm thinking, Mona at age 17, did he need all of this proof? Because the faith of Baha'u'llah is a blessing, is a light. And so if we could have this slide so we can study it, we have deepening on it and so on. And secondly, the message of the House of Justice just a few days ago on 28 was impressive. And they are talking about the vast expansion of the faith and a report card. And when I was reading it, I thought, unbelievable, 235 countries and territories. What faith did this previously? Even now, all of the faiths are clustered in some areas, but we are all over the place. Languages, over 800 translation. Where are those languages? So it's amazing. People are waking up to this. And I just want to thank you again, and please have that somehow emailed to us or something so we can have the. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I'll email the slides to Brett.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shala, please.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. And partially, Parvane referred to what I was going to sort of mention and then ask an opinion. You know, every time the methods of growth in the Baha'i community changes, Baha'is feel we are not growing. And I find that happening in many communities. All the Baha'is who were used to the fireside suddenly felt kind of, oh my God. Or when there was that period where we were forming assemblies or opening areas or the 10-year crusade. Every time the methods of growth
what changed, and Universal House of Justice gave us a new pattern of action. People felt, oh my God, things are not happening. But as this letter of 28 mentions, it's wow. I find that the growth and the development of the writings and the faith has become so vast. In the past, we used to have every city one feast, everybody got together, and so we felt kind of large and together. Now we have divided into, even a feast has 10 or 12 different areas, clusters have different areas. And so somehow I think Baha'is feel, some Baha'is, that we are not growing. But in India alone, they have 1 million activities happening. When you're talking about 800 languages, it's beyond my belief that the faith has grown in my lifetime. From when we were very few assemblies, NSAs in the world, to now, every country in the world has a National Spiritual Assembly. We are translating this, the institute process. And in our little area in Côte d'Ivoire, we have hundreds of kids from different parts of the world participating in institute process, children's classes, junior youth group, ISGP, all these things. I find the faith is growing really fast. I don't know. I'm so excited. So I'm wondering if there's two ways of seeing it. Why is it some of us seeing it? Is it because that we are not looking at declaration cards anymore? Or is it because we are divided into smaller groups, working on smaller groups? I'm wondering why this kind of two kinds of thoughts is happening.
We don't know because we don't have the information.
Yeah, I think for the reasons you list, also for the reasons given in the letter that we just received, that looks at the sweep of history and how the Baha'i community and the expression of it in the world has really changed radically at several points in its history. You had the time when it was really confined to Persia during, and a few scattered other places during the lifetime and ministry of Baha'u'llah. And then you have during Abdu'l-Baha's time, it makes its first entrance into the West, particularly into the United States and into Europe. And here it attracts Baha'is of a particular type. First of all, they were Westerners, or before they were Easterners, of a particular, let's say, more mystical type, more sort of universalistic. It was a very, and you can see this reflected in the pilgrim notes of the time. You can see it reflected in the letters that Abdu'l-Baha, the thousands of letters that Abdu'l-Baha exchanged with his followers, with the believers at that time. And then when Abdu'l-Baha died and Shoghi Effendi became the guardian, there were several decades where it was really a radical change in direction. A change in direction which we can look in retrospect as being a necessary stage in the unfoldment of the Baha'i faith. If it's going to become a world order, it also, it needs to have properties, and it has to have funds, and it has to have an organizational structure. It also has to be worldwide. And so you can look at the ministry of the guardian through that lens of elevating the Baha'i faith to this status of a global religion, which in some ways was, not in the same direction that the Baha'is during Abdu'l-Baha's time thought of it as. And one can only imagine the challenge, and we know because we read it sometimes in some of our literature and notes at the time. It was a huge challenge for the Abdu'l-Baha Baha'is when Shoghi Effendi came and changed the whole direction of things. And of course, the challenge happened again and again with the passing of Shoghi Effendi, and then with the House of Justice changing plans. It can change plans whenever it wants to. That's the beauty of it. It can radically change the structure of the faith. There's certain fundamentals that aren't going to change, but what it can change, I think, is is a lot more than what it can't change. It can create and dissolve institutions. It can create all sorts of configurations of social activities that weren't there before. And just as quickly as it did so, upon reflection, upon action, upon consultation, it can assess things and choose a different direction. And so it can stop on a dime and go with another direction. What other religion can do this? Has this potential to radically change direction? And of course, when it does so, it creates discomfort because people are used to doing things in a certain way. I mean, I was used to doing things in a certain way. I grew up a Baha'i as a child, and how I remember what it felt like being in a Baha'i community in Portland, when I was in grade school and in junior high school is very different from what it feels like to me now. And that's challenging to me in some ways. And I know some of that is that, well, I'm in my 50s now, and I was in my teens then. And so part of it is just I'm at a different stage in life, and I'm, encountering things differently and thinking about things differently. Part of it is that the community itself has changed a great deal, and it will continue to change into the future. And that's something we can be sure of. The only thing we can be sure of is that the future is not going to be anything like the present, and the present is nothing like the past. And that's a big challenge for a religious community, because it's the only religious community that has that as one of its guiding principles, this idea of dynamic evolution in response to the needs of the day. It's like all the other religions, they may have evolved a bit over time, but they were much more, I think, anchored or what we would say is Baha'is weighed down by a kind of crystallization of ideas and structure that once set at the beginning really could not really much be changed. And that's a huge challenge when society itself is in constant state of motion, and an even bigger challenge in this last century when suddenly that motion becomes hyper accelerated. And I believe in the next few decades, the acceleration is only going to increase. I mean, we're seeing the development of, just to throw out artificial intelligence as a new development, which, okay, it writes our essays now or whatever, answers questions in a clever way. This is only the beginning. And just within our lifetimes, in a few years, certainly within a few decades, we're going to see huge changes to economies, to cultures, and so forth. What people do with their lives is going to change hugely just in the next few years. That's going to absolutely have an impact on religious organizations. How do religions work? All of this is just part of the fun, if I can say it, and the challenge of being in a community that takes evolution as one of its foundational principles.
Thank you. Yes.
So much.
Thank you.
So much to talk about here. Stephen, this is going back to one of the comments you made in your talk earlier. So it's from the chat. Can you tell us a little how you would explain the nature of our interconnectedness? How are we interconnected? What does it actually mean when we say we are interconnected?
Well, I mean, as with many of these kinds of big ideas, it's true at multiple levels, and I can speak, I guess, most naturally to the ground level, which is things are interconnected in the sense of being entangled, in the sense of quantum entanglement. That there is a state of the universe which is described as a wave function, in which no entity is truly separate from any other entity. There is a deep interconnectedness and something that infuses all things in a kind of a cause and effect or reciprocal relationship. Now, it's also the case that these entangled relationships that really make the universe into a single system can at some level be disregarded when one is actually navigating the world. So it's actually a quite useful approximation to assume that I am not the same as you, and I'm not the same as the bus that's coming at me, and so I'm going to duck to get out of the way. If I really believed that it was all one, I wouldn't have any kind of survival instinct. So at some level, it's a great approximation to say that everything is disconnected and that everything is you know, can be described piecewise and thought of piecewise. But at the same time that is a great way of understanding the world and a useful way of understanding the world, particularly if one is looking through the eyes of a scientist or an engineer, or one who wants to manipulate the world. If one wants to navigate the social world, the world of human relationships, I think that's where the assumption of the separateness of things breaks down just as severely as it breaks down at the elementary level, at the particle level, when it breaks down because of quantum entanglement. I think at this level of human social organizations, we are far more deeply connected than certain fashionable ideologies would like us to think. Certain fashionable ideologies, which are very prevalent in the West, ones that say, I'm my own man, you know, the myth of the rugged individualism, which is not 100% wrong. I mean, in the early years of the founding of the American Republic, it was a useful thing because there wasn't a social safety network out on the frontier, and rugged individuals tended to survive better than those that depended on a safety network. But as our civilization has progressed, the degree of interconnectedness has also intensified, so that old way of thinking, which thinks of us first of all as individuals, and secondly as members of some larger community, is becoming less and less in accord with the needs and exigencies of the day. And the need and exigency of today is more to see ourselves as Baha'u'llah said, and as Baha'is love to quote, as fingers of one hand, as members of one body. But in saying that, I also don't want to like totally turn away from and renounce what I think represents a huge spiritual thrust forward in human evolution over the last few centuries, which has been the discovery of the individual and the discovery of individual autonomy as a good thing for society. And so somehow this discovery of the individual, you know, visible in, say, Renaissance painting and so forth, you can analyze it from all sorts of angles. You know, philosophically, you can analyze it. There is a sense also in which the Baha'i faith, while it focuses on the organic unity of the human race, also at the same time, maybe paradoxically, validates this autonomy of the individual, the spiritual autonomy of the individual, in our core principle of the independent investigation of reality. It's up to us individually, one by one, to investigate and decide if we are to be a member of this faith or not. It is not up to our parents. It is not up to our society. There are, of course, factors, but they are not the determinants. The determinant is our own moral autonomy and our own spiritual autonomy. So somehow the two have to balance. Somehow the sort of interconnectedness of things, which is becoming more and more important to realize in this day, has to be balanced with the autonomy of the individual. I don't think we've learned how to do that yet. Partly because we don't have any model where it's done successfully. And so it's very easy to tilt too far in one direction or too far in the other direction. And I think getting the right balance is going to be is going to be a challenge into the future.
There's a question in the chat asking whether you have, or whether you're familiar with Michael Tellinger's books.
I'm not, unfortunately.
There was one in particular called One Small Town. It's an initiative. Sounds very similar to the lifestyle that you describe as being necessary. So maybe something you can.
I'm making a note. I'll look it up afterwards.
Michael Tellinger. Another question, and you did touch on it briefly, so I think it lends itself well. Do you any comments on AI and the spiritual evolution of humanity?
How long do we have? I have only a few minutes because I have to pick up another child from not the one you saw in the background, but another child from school in just a few minutes. So yes, I think it is absolutely a fascinating topic. Maybe it's worth like an entire like session on its own, because it is going to completely change and clarify for us, well, what is consciousness and what isn't consciousness? What these present and future AI systems are going to do is going to, in a way, make what we thought is this essence of humanity become quite redundant. So these things have an intelligent, well, not an intelligence in the sense that humans have it, maybe. They're not conscious in the way humans are conscious, but they're able to do things which kind of it pulls a bit of the ground away from our feet, and it makes us ask, well, what am I here for? You know, once the sort of 10th generation AI robot comes out and it's taking care of all my housework, and it's out in the fields making food for everybody, and it's maintaining the streets, and it's doing all the things, right? What does it mean now to be human? Oh, and it's writing great poetry for us, and it's writing music for us, and it's creating beautiful art and all these other things. What's our job now? What does it mean to be human now that we've created something which is going to be taking our place in so many different ways? I think that's going to help clarify for us what is spirituality and what isn't. It's going to be a very nice kind of knife that cuts away a lot of things that are superfluous in our consideration of that subject, just as a starting point.
Stephen, do you have time for a couple more?
Yeah, like 2 more questions.
So Gordon, Cheryl, you had your hands up, and then we'll hear from Riaz.
Thank you. I was just thinking when you were talking about the 60s, how us youth, I was back there, how us youth, there was that whole peace movement, reaction to war, and then all the Baha'i youth that came into the faith. I think there's something similar going on right now. And what it has to do with is involvement with self-help groups, looking for support in society. I think it's huge, even in terms of 12-step groups, people reaching out, absolutely desperate. And I find I'm getting involved with some of those groups. And what I find is when I talk about my own suffering, my own challenges in my life, I've had the bounty of being a Baha'i all those years too, but it doesn't matter who we are. We all have challenges. And I really think those people who are looking for support are out there, but the Baha'is aren't ready for it. So let's start dealing with our own challenges first, and along with others. Is when you're talking with people who are homeless or whatever the situation is, my goodness, they have gems of wisdom to share with you. You wouldn't know that unless you're involved with something like that. It's just curious what you would say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, there's an enormous mental health crisis out there that our children are deeply affected by it and beyond. And part of it is pandemic related, but it's well beyond that. And I agree with you that the Baha'is could really be taking a more active role in that. That's something we have direct tools for. You know, we have something to offer when it comes to this mental health crisis and crisis of depression and disconnectedness, which is so infecting society today.
Riaz, please.
Thank you, Stephen. Wonderful. In your slides, we saw a statement that we have no access to ultimate reality. And now this can be even I feel expanded to we have no access to all reality, not just ultimate, but there's a lot of reality that we have no access. And one of the realities that we struggle with is this concept of spiritual reality. I feel we would go a long way in understanding the concept of spiritual, the term spiritual, as something being real, but not in the physical. It doesn't reside in the physical dimension. It's a reality beyond the physical. Now, and this will solve a lot of problems. For example, love resides in the spiritual reality. Justice unity, the concept of interconnectedness. All these are beyond the physical. These are relationships that happen in the spiritual plane. So we can refer to a spiritual plane, the physical plane and the spirit. And it would help us a lot understand what is spiritual and what is physical. Now, physical we are very familiar with, and for our disappointment, everything that's physical is the interconnectedness of atoms. And these don't have these atoms and interconnected atoms, they cannot express love or justice, because love and justice, these reside in a plane above the atom and above the physical. And Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah, in the Baha'i writings, there's a lot of reference to spiritual, and and they reach for a metaphor that's very interesting. The metaphor they use a lot is light, because we are in the physical and they're describing a spiritual reality. So they use a lot of the metaphor of light and illumination and radiance, and to convey a condition, a spiritual condition beyond the physical. So I think the sooner we realize that there is a plane above the material, above the atom and the molecule, that plane, we keep calling it spiritual for lack of a better word, but that's the reality that I think in your slide, that we don't have direct access. We cannot grab it. We cannot see it. We cannot touch it. Happens in the case of love or justice. We cannot grab love or justice. These reside in a spiritual plane that interconnect us, but at the same time interconnect us in a very strong way, more strong than if we were interconnected physically. Even if we're interconnected holding hands, there may not be love. We may not give our life for the other person, even if we are physically interconnected. But if we have this spiritual interconnection above the material, then we're ready to give our life for that person and others. So I feel we should, especially Baha'is, we keep using this term spiritual as though it was some ethereal, imaginary thing. No, I think it's a real, but it's above our reach. And in your slide, you said we have no access. And yes, we don't have direct physical access, but that reality is a plane, a plane of reality that dominates the physical. Anyway, sorry, that was too long.
Yes. No, thank you for that. And to sort of loop it back to to that initial statement, we don't have direct access to it. We do have access to its influence or effect in the world. And this is, I think, one of those places where we can argue philosophically about whether the right way to think about spirit in its essence is in a dualistic framework or in a non-dualistic framework. These are philosophical questions that have been with us for the whole history of recorded religion and probably beyond. But what we can agree on and come to, whether we're top-down thinkers thinking it's God and spirit acting in the world through history, or whether we're bottom-up thinkers and thinking about, well, how is the world structured and what do we need to do to sort of continue to flourish on this planet? Those two perspectives can converge in a realm that is objectively verifiable, which is the realm of the world that we actually live in and perceive. that's the meeting point between spirit and matter. Because we don't really know the essence of matter either. I mean, in a way, it's an equivalent problem on both sides. You know, we have equations to describe, say, the wave function of an electron, but we don't know what the reality of matter is. We only know what happens when we observe it. Suddenly, all of this complicated machinery reduces to a particular observation, a particular moment in time, leaving a still open question: what is the real sort of nature of that physical reality that's behind the observed reality? Likewise with spirit, we experience spirit in a very direct way in our hearts and in our relationships with others and in our moments of prayer and other sacred moments in our lives. And we may have different ideas about, well, what's the reality behind that? But the reality that we experience is the touch point that can unite us, that can unite the world. That's unfortunately, that's all I have time for, because I'm late for the pickup. So with apologies, I have to sign off.
Stephen,
thank you again all for listening.
Thank you so much. There's so much in the chat. We'll try to get it to you. Lots of great discussion. People are thrilled. Quick note from Joni I wanted to share with you. Thank you, Stephen, for your time, your wisdom, and questions to really ponder on. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Hassam. Allah, great to see you. We live across town, but I don't see you often enough in person.
I hope you
Stephen,
do.
thank you.
I hope you do. It was so wonderful to see
Thank you.
there, even on the internet.
Yes, thank you.
And I hope we will see each other. We have some plans, but really, we should have another 10 more meetings to talk about this.
Yes, can't have enough.
Please give my love to your family, to Catherine, and to children. And I just truly enjoyed it.
Thank you, will do. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you,
Come
Hassan.
back,
Take care,
Stephen.
Stephen.
Okay, come back. Promise.
Okay, promise.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to close with a song, if that's okay. I know sometimes people stick around for a few minutes. We can have some prayers if people would like to. So I'll play a song, and if people are still here and they want to say a few prayers, then I'd be happy to keep the lines open. I was just inspired as I was listening to Stephen, and this concept of translating scripture, translating what is written into reality, and the extent to which it's not enough for us to just download all of the goodness that is the revelation and these amazing things that we're talking about. But if we don't take that and then channel it into something useful for humanity, it's really lost. And so this was a song that we wrote about Mae Maxwell and her love for Abdul Baha.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
So this is called Land and Sea. Gotta remember where I play it. It's been a while. I'll cross land and sea to follow thee. Take me on a journey of love. Lead my steps aright by your light and your life, and fill me with the fire of love. How you came to me, even only in a dream, shining light on what I could not see, and I will follow thee in discomfort or in ease. I'll cross land and sea. And I have heard your call and set out from my home. Restless and ablaze I will go. When my time has come and my service is done, let me circle round where you lay. even only in a dream, shining light on what I could not see, and I will follow thee in discomfort or in ease, across land and sea. How you came to me, even only in a dream, shining light on what I could not see, and I will follow thee in discomfort or in ease, across land and sea. Thank you, dear friends, for being here. Just so wonderful. And thank you always, as always, to Farouz for helping to bring us all together.
Thanks,
Thank
Brett.
you so much.
Thank you. This was more than bountiful.
Wow, it was quite a trip.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to everyone.
Come back again.